Today I'm going to be showing you how to create these unique randomized hi-hat and percussion patterns that can potentially replace top loops that you're using from sample packs. Here's some examples of what we're going to be making. Now, the way that I'm going to be making these patterns is using this hats and percussion track that I've got here. And essentially what I've got is a drum rack with some samples loaded into it. So in order to create this, what I did is I did insert MIDI track, and I came to drums and dragged an empty drum rack onto this MIDI track. Now, a drum rack is just a rack that holds 128 samplers, so you can have 128 different audio files in here and then draw in your patterns. What I then did is came into my samples folder and pulled out the percussion hits or hi-hats or whatever that I wanted to be in here. So things that work well are short, snappy samples like percussion hits, closed hi-hats, even vocal chops, things like that are going to work really nicely. All you have to do is click and drag them in. And all of the ones that I use today are from Production Music Live, and I'll put a link down below if you want to check those out. So yeah, essentially I just filled up a drum rack, well, not filled up, but put the samples that I want to use in here. So let's delete that one that I was just showing you as an example. And let's have a look at the one that I've got here. The next thing that I need to do is create a MIDI clip by clicking and dragging and right-clicking, insert MIDI clip. Now we can see all of those samples just here. Let's have a listen to what they all sound like. So what I'm going to do from here is create a MIDI note on each one of these samples. The shortcuts I'm using are Option or Alt to duplicate things and Command or Control A to select all. Let's hold down Option, drag these down, and then Command A to select all, and again Option to just drag down and fill this out. Finally, Command A to select all of these, and then I'm going to use a button over on the left which is legato. That's going to mean that these MIDI notes span the entire length of the MIDI clip. Now this looks really quite strange. If I hit play now, all that's going to happen is all of those one shots are going to play on that first hit, and it's not going to sound very nice at all. So what we need in order to create this sort of randomized pattern is a couple of MIDI effects. So let's go into MIDI effects, and we're going to be using two things. We're going to want an arpeggiator and we're going to want a velocity tool. So first things first, let's go into the device view using this tab in the bottom right. This is the device view and this is the clip view. And what we're going to do is drag the arpeggiator in front of the drum rack and then the velocity tool just ahead of the arpeggiator so that it looks like this. Now, an arpeggiator is an effect that takes the MIDI notes that are playing, which is all of them in this case because they span the whole length of the MIDI clip, and it repeats them in whatever pattern or style you set. So what we're going to do is set the style to be random. Okay, so it's just going to be throwing random MIDI notes out at us. We're going to set the rate to 16th notes, which is that tick, 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 that kind of pattern. And what we're going to do with the velocity tool is this is going to help us add a little bit of variation to how loud the samples are being played. If you've programmed drums before, you'll know that varying the velocity can make it sound a little bit more human and a little bit less static. So what we set is the upper value and the lower value that we want those random velocities to come in at. So let's go for 47 as the lowest possible value and 127 as the highest possible value, and then add a bunch of random here. And you can see the sort of range here in this graph that we're going to be getting. So let's run with that. What you're now going to hear when I play this is just a bunch of these samples being played in a random order. So let's have a listen to that and then we'll refine it a little bit afterwards. Okay, there we go. So you get some really interesting things out of there. Not all of it's going to be usable, but what the idea behind this is just get a bunch of it captured, which I'm going to show you how to do now, and then go in and pick out what you like. What I tend to find with this technique is that I'll hear 2 or 3 bits during the playback, and I'll go, yeah, that's really cool. I like how that goes. Do, or something along those lines. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to capture the output of this so that you can use it and makes it a little bit more usable. So let's create a MIDI track. And this is the MIDI track that we're going to use to capture what the arpeggiator is outputting so that we can use it. In order to do that, let's set the input to be coming from the hats and percussion track, whatever track you set up the drum rack on. And what we're going to do is hit record arm there so that all of these MIDI notes that are coming out of the arpeggiator are going to be recorded onto this track once we hit record up here. The final thing to do is just extend these out a little bit. So let's just hit duplicate to get this going for a little bit more time. And finally, I'm just going to hit record up here. And what you're going to see is just, as I say, that recording of MIDI notes coming in down here. So let's do that. Great stuff. So we've now got a bunch of completely random MIDI notes. And a couple of things that you could do at this stage is double click on this and apply a groove file. So this is a groove file that I tend to use a lot, just to add a little bit of swing. So I can do that and then hit commit. And that means that we're going to have some notes that are slightly off of the grid like this, just to say, to give it a little bit of feel. And what you can see also is that the varied velocities have recorded in really nicely. So we've got completely random velocities for all of these MIDI notes, which is really cool. Now what we want to do is get rid of these MIDI clips with all of the MIDI notes in, and we want to put this recording back up here, because if we try to play that MIDI clip on this MIDI track, there's nothing for it to be triggering, so we're not going to hear anything. So we need to put it back up here. Another couple of things that we need to do before we play back so that we're hearing this actual recording of the MIDI notes is get rid of the arpeggiator and the velocity, because we've already got the varied velocities in there. We don't need it to keep randomizing. And then simply play back. And what I'm going to be listening for is the bits that I like. And I'm going to show you how to sort of extract those, get them put in, and then refine it a little bit so that you've got some sort of usable kind of top loops out of this. Okay, so that sounded good to me. Let's have a little play of that again. So it's a little bit busy, but I can take some of those notes out. So let's do that. I'm going to hold down Option with this section selected and just drag it out. And that creates a sort of copy of it over here. Then I don't want to get rid of this yet because I'm not 100% certain. So I'm just going to stick it over there. But let's get this in at the start and work on refining that. So what I tend to do is get rid of the sections that play when the hi-hats are playing. So maybe that. So that we're not clashing with the closed or open hi-hats. I'm not sure about these. I think I'd probably have a different section of the track which has sort of shaker or quicker hi-hats going. So I'm going to get rid of these. that. These. There we go. So that's just a random one that I've done quite quickly for you. You can obviously spend a little bit more time choosing your samples and refining this, but a few things that you can do to make this a little bit more interesting is change out the samples. You can add some effects. You can change the arpeggiator settings. And on those initial MIDI clips where we had MIDI notes going across the whole pattern, you could just have it in certain places, vary that. I like to think of this as kind of useful randomness that you can then implement into your tracks without having to come up with all of the ideas up front. I think it's a really nice way to work. If you want to then convert this into an audio file, you can do freeze and flatten, which is right click and freeze, and then right click and flatten. And I've got another video which I'll pop up on the card now, which goes into this in a little bit more detail. But there we go. That's essentially a top loop there for you that we've just created. So there we go. I hope that's been helpful for you. And if you want to start learning Ableton Live in more depth and start making tracks that are going to sound great in a club and that labels are going to want to sign, then I definitely recommend you check out the Ableton Accelerator course that I've got details for in the description down below this video. Thanks for spending a bit of time with me today, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.